you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too. Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The British public is facing even more disruption from the industrial inaction of the rail unions, but train drivers are among the best paid people in the country. So why are they going on strike? A leaky loyalist reveals the Democratic Unionist Party has finally endorsed a deal to restore Northern Ireland's government after nearly 2 years of gridlock over power sharing between unionists and nationalists. But has our union, with this core part of our United Kingdom, been conserved or compromised? And a State of the Nation exclusive, a gospel singer who was wrongly told by a Metropolitan Police volunteer that she wasn't allowed to sing church songs outside of church grounds, will be joining me live in the studio as the force announces an investigation into the volunteer. BBC documents obtained by the Daily Telegraph have revealed the public service broadcaster has been telling recruiters not to hire those who are not on board with the diversity and inclusion agenda. We'll be hearing from the man who uncovered the story. And perhaps most importantly, with the help of Polly as necessary, we'll bring you up to date on the missing macaw monkey in the Scottish Highlands. As and when they happen, State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my most theatrical panel this evening. You could probably hear them cackling in the background. Barrister and former Tory MP, Jerry Hayes, and the author and journalist, Michael Crick. As always, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's what you've all been waiting for, the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB newsroom tonight is that the Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland has backed a deal with the UK government on post-Brexit trade agreements. That could potentially see power sharing there restored by Friday. The deal aims to end the nearly 2-year Stormont stalemate. The full details of the proposed agreement are to be published tomorrow. The Northern Ireland Secretary said today the agreement is welcome and a significant step. Sinn Féin's leader said she's optimistic about the future. In the United States, President Biden said today he has decided how the US will respond to a drone strike that killed 3 of its troops in Jordan. Speaking outside the White House today, he declined to reveal details on what that would look like, but added the US didn't need a wider war in the Middle East. A militia group backed by Iran claimed responsibility for the attack on a US military base. Mr. Biden's comments coming after Rishi Sunak urged Iran to work towards de-escalating the situation. The UK's total population is set to hit 70 million due to immigration, and it's a decade sooner than expected. New ONS figures project that immigration is due to add an extra 6.1 million people to the UK by 2036. The ONS saying it shows the likelihood of higher levels of international migration over the long term. It comes as the government says new visa changes will make a tangible difference to the figures. And a Labour MP today said the party should fight the next election on a pledge to bring down net migration. He said the figure was to under 100,000 a year. A raft of restrictions are due to come in force within weeks as Rishi Sunak pledges to bring the number down. But speaking earlier to GB News' political editor Christopher Hope, Khalid Mahmood said the plan should be in Labour's manifesto.
Of our own people we train, the less of those people will come in.
And what's your number, though, to ask you?
I would certainly be very happy with less than 100,000, but we need to work at that, and we need to put training, we need to proper resources into those places to get those young people working.
Do you want that in your party manifesto?
Well, I certainly would like, and I think the Labour Party is moving towards that, yes.
Khalid Mahmood there. Now, the Prime Minister's been accused of playing games rather than trying to help resolve the long-running train drivers' dispute over pay. It comes as passengers face continued travel disruption today as ASLEF union train drivers launched a fresh wave of walkouts. Downing Street says it'll consider strengthening minimum service levels after train operators opted not to use the new law during strikes. For the latest on GB News' story, sign up to the GB News alert by scanning the QR code on your screen. This is Britain's news channel.
Thousands of rail services will be cancelled across the country over the next several days, with operators such as LNER, Avanti West Coast, South Western Railway and many others, 18 in all, being affected owing to a train driver strike. So the question is, why are they going on strike? The union behind the strike is ASLEF, headed by Mike Whelan, who is claiming that drivers are not being paid enough. That's a normal thing for a trade unionist to say. In some ways, it's the job of a trade union leader to get more money for his members, in spite of the fact that ASLEF has rejected an offer that would have seen train drivers' salaries reach £65,000. With overtime included, some drivers are already taking home salaries that put them in the top 5% of earners in the country. But we knew the union leaders were hard left socialists, as left always has been. Go back to the 70s when the joke was, as left my train in the station. But the more illuminating part of this story is that the rail bosses are a bunch of wet wipes. The government has passed legislation enabling these companies to keep minimum services of at least 40% of normal operations. But all 18 operators affected by the strikes have voided this, other than one who had a go, was even wetter, had a very feeble little effort to use the legislation, but then ASLEF said they go on strike for 5 more days, so they backed down. This is so feeble, so utterly wet, so pusillanimous. And the rail industry is just sucking on the teat of public subsidy. It's your money. It's the railway's gravy train. Last year alone, you paid rail companies nearly £12 billion in subsidies. As Ross Clark has pointed out in the Daily Mail, a leaked slide from an Avanti West Coast internal meeting a couple of weeks ago referred to the subsidies as free money and went on to say, sounds too good to be true. Well, on this occasion, it isn't. They are happy taking your money. The whole point of privatising the rail services was to make them stand on their own 2 feet. But by giving them endless subsidies, free money as they call it themselves, we have enabled them to exploit you, the taxpayer. In other words, the rail companies could have softened the blow of these strikes significantly, avoiding the inconvenience for millions across the country. But because of the endless flow of free money provided by you, they refused to try. The point of free markets is that businesses have to feel the consequences of their decisions. But when we subsidise businesses, these consequences cease to exist. And the rail bosses pick up very generous salaries, in part paid for you, by you, while you can't get to work. And then they are so unutterably wet. I think it's time the government stood up more to the rail companies and said if they don't make use of legislation provided to keep trains running, they should lose some of their subsidies. As ever, let me know your thoughts, mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm now delighted to be joined by writer and trade unionist Paul Embry. Paul, thank you for coming back on this programme. What is ASLEF really going on strike for when train drivers are pretty well paid?
Well, they're going on strike, Jacob, because those train drivers have not received a pay rise for 5 years. And those train drivers, irrespective of the fact that some of them are paid more than the average worker, still have to suffer the cost of living crisis that the rest of us are having to contend with, are still seeing increases in their mortgages as a result of the interest rate rises, are still having to contend with increased energy bills, and are still having to deal with what all workers are having to deal with in this country, which is the tightest grip on wages since Napoleonic times. So simply saying that, well, they earn more than the average worker somehow justifies the idea that they don't deserve a pay rise or that they shouldn't fight for a decent pay rise when they're not being given one, I don't think is a sustainable argument.
But they're in the top 5% of earners with overtime, and they're doing a job that many, many people would like to do. It's not a shortage occupation. We don't need to pay more to attract more drivers. It remains many schoolboys dream to become a train driver, so there's plenty of supply.
Well, I don't think it's just the case of, well, because people want to do the job, therefore we shouldn't pay them well. There were lots of young boys and girls would love to be professional footballers, but I don't think you would argue that that means that professional footballers shouldn't be entitled to decent wages. At the end of the day, these people are critical workers. We saw their value during the pandemic. And we saw how the country, including the government, was only too happy to say how important they were and cheer them to the rafters. But isn't it funny that when they weren't important during the pandemic? So we say, oh no, actually, these people are holding the country to ransom, you know, and we dress them up as some kind of industrial monsters.
The train drivers weren't important during the pandemic. They were enormously well paid for doing nothing because no one was allowed to go on the trains. It was the most enormous subsidy to maintain the rail network, for which there's no gratitude now to the hard-pressed taxpayer. If it had been dependent on actual usage, the railways would have been out of business during the pandemic.
Look, actually, throughout that 3-year period or whatever it was, there were times when the trains were running, when other industries were effectively closing down and lots of people were working from home in a way that occasionally rail drivers and other people on the front line could not do. And my point, Jacob, is it's okay to cheer them to the rafters when, you know, the government wants them to do certain things, but when it comes to giving them a pay rise and when it comes to them fighting for a pay rise, the government suddenly says, no, these people are militants and they don't deserve it. But isn't it funny how, you know, the same people, I have to say, including you, Jacob, will not criticise, for example, the fact that city bonuses are going through the roof, the fact that directors' pay is going through the roof, the fact that some of our corporations in a cost of living crisis have been recording record profits, the fact that there is undoubted profiteering going on at the moment with what some people have described as greedflation, where businesses are
criticise
trying to make money out of the economic situation. Why is it that people on the front line who fight for a decent pay rise are attacked?
I did just criticise the pay of the rail bosses. which are basically given them by the taxpayer. And I criticised the pay of the rail bosses because they're not using this new legislation to keep the railways running. Surely they should use that to provide the 40% service.
Jacob, you're criticising the rail bosses for the simple reason that you don't think they're being hard enough on the workers. That's the reason you're criticising them. You don't think necessarily that rail bosses shouldn't earn the kind of astronomical salaries that they earn, and you don't think it's wrong that other people across the country, you know, people in the city, directors earn the astronomical money that they earn. And isn't it funny when those people threaten, you know, if the government doesn't give us what we want in terms of low tax rates and low regulation, then we'll take our money abroad. You never condemn those people for holding the country to ransom, but when it's an ordinary worker fighting for a decent pay increase, suddenly you do.
I'm criticising people who are getting taxpayer subsidies to give themselves huge pay rises and aren't actually the bosses who aren't actually using their ability to keep the railways running. But thank you very much, Paul. Always a pleasure to have me on. With me now is my panel, barrister and former Tory MP Jerry Hayes and the author and journalist Michael Crick. Michael, isn't it utterly feeble of these railway companies, which have been subsidised up to their eyeballs, not to do something to help their passengers and keep the service going?
Well, they should pay the drivers more. They should...
What?
Yes.
Why?
Well,
What?
because
60 grand a year?
Yes, they should... Well, I believe
How many
in free
journalists
markets.
get 60 grand a year?
I believe in free markets. And if there's a shortage of railway staff, which there frequently is...
Not of railway drivers?
Well, there's certainly a shortage of train staff. And trains don't run as a result of it. They're more and more cancelled as a result of it.
But not because of drivers, because the drivers are well paid. There's a queue of people wanting to become train drivers because it's a well-paid job and you're going on rails.
The other point to be made that Paul didn't make is that actually it's a highly responsible job. If you're a train driver, you are often driving a train of 500, sometimes 1,000 passengers. And the welfare and safety of those passengers is down to you and the guard, if there is one, and of course increasingly there aren't guards anymore. It's a much more responsible job than you might think, and that's why another reason why they deserve to be well paid. But this idea of the railway company, the trouble is, the railway companies can't really say, well, we've got to do 40% of keep 40% of services going. So you, and you've got to come in tomorrow, and the rest of you can remain on strike. It just wouldn't work.
They can do
in
that.
Practical terms.
That's what the law allows them to do,
well,
and they can fire.
And if the drivers said, well, we're not coming in, we're remaining on strike, then what would happen?
Then they're fired.
Well, it would only make the industrial relations situation worse.
But it's terrible.
And actually make them more militant than they are now.
Where is the sympathy in the public for people who are earning over £60,000 a year? How many journalists own over £60,000 a year? How many people in the provinces on local newspapers earn that sort of money? They don't. There is no sympathy with them whatsoever. They are not ordinary workers. So they really, really should.
I don't know how you define an ordinary worker.
Yeah, £26,000 a year.
Well, that's the average wage. They're ordinary workers in every other regard. They have to go in at set hours and they have responsibilities.
Average wage, 26,000 quid a year, Michael.
It is a skilled job, and it bears a lot of responsibility.
It's a job
and
that
as Paul says, they haven't had a pay rise for 5 years.
And what about the Spanish practices? What about you're a train driver, you're paid a certain amount of money to walking to your union notice board? Now, this is ridiculous.
Well, if that happens, clearly it's ridiculous.
Well, of course it is, but there are lots of things.
And Sunday working is still voluntary because of an agreement made in about 1920.
Well, that is an agreement. Don't you believe in agreements?
Well, some agreements are very out of date.
What does the F stand for?
Well, I mean, in which case it's time to renegotiate.
What does the F stand for in ASLEF?
Firemen.
Yes. What do firemen do? They actually do.
This is an argument for changing the name of the union, but
aren't you actually being rather sentimental about train drivers? That if you go back to the age of steam, it was a really hard, physically demanding, dirty job.
Yeah.
It is now sitting in a comfortable cab, most of what you do controlled by signals. Almost all our railway lines could be converted to driverless trains with a modest amount of investment, which is strongly opposed, of course, by the unions, for which you're paid pretty well.
But in some ways, it's harder to do if you only have to make a decision every now and then. It's very, very difficult to lose attention, to drop off, as it were, and you can't afford to. The welfare of the 1,000 passengers in your train depends on you.
But trains have the dead man's grip, so that if you drop off, the train automatically stops.
Well,
all of this is automated.
Well, we still get crashes from time to time, and sometimes they're due to human error, and I think we should bear all these things in mind. But, I mean, at the end of the day, it's free market, isn't it? It's free
Michael.
It's free collective bargaining.
But I want to go back to these companies, because they've been given this law, they can provide a service to their customers, they're up their eyeballs in subsidies, and they're letting everybody
Because, as
down.
Margaret Thatcher would say, they're frit. They are concerned about what will happen with the unions. And you haven't mentioned the £1 million bonuses some of these people who are running the companies are getting. And actually, it's our money.
Well, we're all agreed on that. We are all agreed on that. It's ridiculous, and it's politically inept at a time when you've got an industrial dispute going on to take large bonuses.
Well, thank heavens Grant Shapps is in charge.
No, he's not. He's now Minister of Defence.
Oh, is he? Who is the Minister?
Mark Harper.
Oh, is it Mark?
It's very difficult to keep up these days, though.
Thank you to my panel. Coming up next, Northern Ireland's Assembly, Stormont, is set to begin sitting for the first time in nearly 2 years. Plus, the BBC likes diversity, but not diversity of thought.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. We've been discussing the rail strikes, and you've been sending in your views. So Jenny says, if the train drivers haven't had a pay rise for 5 years, I guess we can assume they've been overpaid for the last 5 years. They earn more than my whole household put together. And Annie, the government should be withholding part of the subsidies to the companies when they do not apply the new legislation to keep the trains running, which I agree with. Also, we've had an email, Rees-Mogg, asking why I'm wearing a black tie. Now, I would like to boast and say that it's to acknowledge that today is the 375th anniversary of the execution of King Charles, King and Martyr, marking the beginning of the interregnum, and a year that was described by historian Edward Hyde, Earl of Clarendon, Lord Chancellor, as one of reproach and infamy above all years which had passed before it, a year of the highest dissimulation and hypocrisy, of the deepest villainy and most bloody treasons that any nation was ever cursed with. Let today be a reminder that without the Restoration we could have become the constitutional calamity that is today known as the French Republic. However, there is a better reason for my wearing a black tie. I was at the memorial service for Lord Brooke of Sutton Mandeville earlier on today. He was a distinguished Northern Ireland secretary and begetter of the peace process, who would no doubt be interested in today's news that the 2-year-long gridlock preventing the reinstatement of Northern Ireland's devolved government finally seems to have been cleared after a private meeting of senior Democratic Unionist Party officials endorsed the leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson's deal to restore power sharing. Despite the apparent endorsement, Sir Geoffrey told colleagues that the deal was not perfect, but was a good outcome for the region, and that unionists will continue to fight for further changes. So are today's developments on the seemingly never-ending gridlock in Northern Ireland conserving the union or compromising it? And could a power-sharing agreement led by Sinn Féin stand the test of time? Well, there's nobody better to talk to this with than the former First Minister of Northern Ireland and former leader of the DUP, Arlene Foster. Arlene, thank you very much for coming in. How much do you know as yet about what is in the command paper? There have been some leaks, but it sounds quite positive so far.
I think it does sound quite positive. The first thing I want to say to you, Jacob, is like so many other things, we wouldn't start from here if we had a choice. You know as well as I do that the protocol, the then Windsor framework, sought to bring about a difference between trade in Great Britain and in Northern Ireland, barriers between the two. And of course, if you live and work in Northern Ireland, we do all of our business, most of our business, with the rest of the United Kingdom. So those supply chains are very, very important to us. And what the DUP has been saying and what they've been negotiating about over this past 2 years has been about the internal market of the United Kingdom, restoring the internal market of the United Kingdom, fulfilling the Act of Union, if you like, to have that free trade moving about. So it'll be very interesting tomorrow to see the command paper, to see what's in it in relation to trade, but also in relation to all of the other parts around it as well. What does it say about the union, for example? What does it say about strengthening the union? Because we know that DUP members have been very strong on that during this past 2 years. So it comes out tomorrow, and I think that will give everybody a chance to see what has been achieved.
And there are other risks, aren't there? We were discussing on this programme just a week or so ago the issue of migration and whether Northern Ireland's subject to EU rules and whether that then becomes a route for illegal migration into the UK if we manage to stop the small boats.
And that's a real problem because immigration's becoming a real issue in the Republic of Ireland. Small towns across the Republic are finding it very difficult to cope at this present moment in time. And therefore, I think the government needs to be very alert to that when we're talking about the Rwanda bill. And as you know, that passed its second reading in the Lords just last night. And so we will come to discuss the detail of that in the Lords very soon. And I'm very much looking forward to getting clarity from the government around immigration. They say that this deal, the Windsor Framework, does not actually apply to immigration. Others, nationalists in particular, would argue differently.
And the issue with power sharing, this is going to be the first time that Sinn Féin has provided the First Minister. How uncomfortable does that make unionists, who still obviously have a majority in terms of the overall population of wanting to remain in the Union, but having an avowedly Republican party having the First Ministership?
So if you look at the numbers in Stormont, there's still a unionist majority, but they have the largest party, so that gives them the right to have the First Minister. But what I think viewers may be interested in is that it's a joint office. So the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister have exactly the same powers. It was to give balance, to have somebody from the nationalist community, and they've been in the Deputy First Minister position for some time now, and from the unionist community as well. So she cannot take decisions, and I know this because I was in the First Minister's office. You cannot take decisions as First Minister unless the Deputy First Minister agrees with you. So it's a very unique set of circumstances. It's a mandatory coalition. So whilst I think symbolically people will be uncomfortable with it because of who she represents and their past with a particular terrorist organisation, the IRA, I think in reality, actually, she doesn't have any more power than whoever the DUP decide to put in as Deputy First Minister.
And so that can work. And then are the changes that we think are going to happen real? Are they agreed with the EU, as far as we know, to ensure that they accept this and we don't find that they then say, well, actually, you've got to change it again? Because part of the problem with the withdrawal agreement is that Northern Ireland remains in part subject to EU law.
Well, I think it's very interesting today, Jacob, and you will have noticed this as well. There was a meeting of the Joint Committee, which is the committee between the United Kingdom and the European Union, and they agreed there that they would actually look at the number of goods that were in the not at risk category, and they would widen that. That means that those goods can come into Northern Ireland. They're not at risk of going into the European Union, and that's good news, and that's a change. And that's, I think, something that people didn't see coming. So it'll be very interesting to see what else there is in the command paper tomorrow in relation to that.
And that's really important because there were many goods not in the not at risk category that it seemed ridiculous that they were never going to go into the Republic of Ireland. And it seemed as if the EU was being deliberately difficult. If there's a change of tone there, that begins to unlock all sorts of things.
I think that's right. And you and I know that the Brexit negotiations were incredibly difficult. The European Union and, regrettably, Ireland used them to actually batter the UK for having the temerity to leave the European Union. And you'll remember as well an EU official saying that Northern Ireland was the price of Brexit. Yes. So, you know, we've been trying to deal with this over a long period of time. It shouldn't have happened, of course, Jacob. And in Northern Ireland, there is a long-term understanding that you don't have something that isn't agreed by the majority of Unionists and the majority of Nationalists. The protocol was never accepted by all of Unionism. Yes. So that has been a huge problem. And I hope we've learned from this that we need to have the majority of Unionism and the majority of Nationalism to make it work in Northern Ireland.
But the one thing Eurosceptics are worried about is that the price for this may be that we don't diverge, and that not just does Northern Ireland not diverge, but the whole of the UK doesn't diverge. That seems to me to be a very high price, if that's what it turns out to be.
No, I don't understand that is the price. I understand that there isn't going to be dynamic alignment. I don't think that's in the deal. I don't think it's going to be there tomorrow. And I know people are concerned about that here in Great Britain. For us in Northern Ireland, we want to see the internal market of the UK work. That's the primacy for us. And I think tomorrow we're going to see that in the command paper.
Well, I think this is good news if Northern Ireland is back in its proper place as full a member of the United Kingdom as Somerset is. And you know that I can't ever say more than that. But, thank you, Arlene. Coming up, we'll be hearing from a young lady who was told by a representative of the Metropolitan Police that she couldn't sing gospel songs in public. Plus, more shocking revelations about the BBC and its diversity agenda.
(2024), a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. We've been discussing the return of power sharing in Northern Ireland, and you've been sending in your very, very balanced views. Jeremy says any agreement led by Sinn Féin will end badly, and Alex says the DUP are the ones who refuse to work with anyone else. It's their fault. So we're achieving due impartiality thanks to the male Moggs. Well, it's been one of the more peculiar stories of the day, a GB News exclusive. The Metropolitan Police has launched an investigation into a volunteer policewoman for telling a young gospel singer, Harmony London, in central London, that she isn't allowed to sing gospel or church songs outside of church grounds.
You're allowed to do anywhere.
No, miss, you're not allowed to sing church songs outside of church grounds, by the way.
You're not allowed to sing church songs outside
of church songs or church
you're not allowed
grounds.
To,
that's fine, that's
You're
fine.
not allowed, she just said you're not allowed to sing church songs outside of church.
Outside of church grounds, unless you have unless you've been authorized by the church to do this kind of songs.
It's not saying anything anymore. Are you saying that you don't care about the Human Rights Act? You're lost?
Well, now, there are no laws against singing in public. You can walk along the street singing if you want to, whether your songs are Christian or not. And clearly this policewoman has made a boo-boo. But I'm really pleased now to be joined by Harmony London, as well as my panel, barrister and former Tory MP Jerry Hayes, and the author-journalist Michael Crick. Harmony, thank you for coming in. This must have been very awkward for you, because you were going about your lawful business, and this lady came up to you and told you weren't allowed to sing.
I mean, it was quite humiliating. I never expected to be treated like that, especially she said, I'm not allowed to sing church songs outside of church. It was just quite shocking for me.
Yes, because you can sing, you can walk along the street singing if you want to.
Yeah, of course.
And you were in a place where busking is actually allowed, that Westminster City Council licenses it, and you're there quite regularly.
I mean, I'm not busking, I'm sharing the gospel. So when she came up to me and, you know, you're busking, you're not allowed to, I'm sharing gospel, which is completely within my human rights. So that was my...
So you're serving as a witness to your Christian faith,
yeah,
which you have the courage to go out on the streets and proclaim, which is one of the instructions in the gospel, that we should proclaim our faith.
Yeah, I mean, throughout the Bible, you're encouraged to sing God's praises. I'm not approaching people, I'm not forcing anybody to listen. I just go out there, I sing. If people want to listen, believers, non-believers, they are welcome to.
And you're not collecting money, you're not trying to raise funds?
I do collect money, I collect donations, but that's towards my gospel album. But I also have to pay to get there, petrol, congestion charge, parking, and the rest goes towards recording.
And were there any other police there at the time? Because there seemed from the picture to be a policeman with a policeman's helmet on who didn't seem to get involved. He must surely have known the law.
I'm not really sure. There was two others. They didn't really say much. It was more kind of her leading it.
And what do you think upset her? Why was she suddenly taking this view? Could you could you tell? Did she say?
I mean, she literally just came over and said, "You need to stop or I'm going to seize your equipment." And she seemed very, she was very angry.
And did she show you a warrant card or any authority? Because she didn't look like a fully blown policeman, but it's hard to tell from the picture.
Not at all, she didn't. She wasn't instructed by Westminster Council to do that. There was no complaints. She just went out of her way.
And I'm not sure she has any right to take away your equipment. Police can't just take things off you when they feel like it.
I mean, that's what she was saying to me. So I just packed up and left. I don't like to cause a scene or anything, so I just...
But you were back singing again today?
Yeah.
And you'll be back singing again tomorrow?
Yes, I will.
And it's in Oxford Street?
Yes.
What hours are you singing so that people can turn up?
Around 1 p.m.
Around 1 p.m. So
Yeah.
I hope lots of people turn up. I'm now going to turn to the panel. Jerry, come on, you're the legal eagle on this panel.
Yes.
What was this police lady thinking?
I don't think she was thinking at all. I just don't understand. You were doing nothing. Now, if you were singing a racist song, if you were encouraging racial hatred or religious hatred, that's a different matter. If you were causing a breach of the peace, that's a different matter. If you were obstructing the highway, that's a different matter. But you weren't. You were proclaiming your faith. And what's wrong with that?
Well, Michael,
100 guineas.
The one thing you and I...
It's very cheap, isn't it?
Very cheap. But the one thing you and I always agree on is freedom of speech.
Yeah.
That for the police to interrupt freedom of speech is not within their remit.
No, and I mean, I'm an atheist, but I'm all in favour of Harmony singing wherever she wants, and indeed other people too. Now, I mean, if it was a gang of drunken football fans, and I speak as a football fan myself, although I don't get drunk very often, it might be a slightly different situation.
Very often.
But you know, the more people singing in the street, the better. And this woman just clearly didn't know what she was talking about, made a terrible error, and she's probably regretting it now.
You see, I'm a bit wet because I feel very sorry for this woman that she was going about doing her voluntary policing. She was trying to be helpful to the community. She's made a boo-boo, and now we're making this worse. We're indulging in this. She's all over social media. People being very unpleasant about her on social media. I don't think she's a bad person.
No.
And we can all make mistakes.
She may well lose her position or job.
Well, I hope
whatever.
not.
But yeah, I think you know, she just made a mistake. I think the best thing that could happen actually would be if Harmony could meet her and just have a coffee or whatever, and and say, right, it was a misunderstanding, and let's leave it at that, and go out.
Invite them on the show next.
Yes, that's right.
That's the answer.
Would you like to meet her to have a perhaps more friendly conversation than being told what to do on the street?
I mean, I'd have to think about it. I never hold things against anyone. I'm not that kind of person. I just felt a bit targeted just because she went out of her way, and I wasn't doing anything wrong. I have a positive impact on people. If you watch my videos, it's enjoyed by... It doesn't matter who you are, what you believe in.
But you'd forgive her because you're
But the worst thing was that she put her tongue out at the very end of that video, didn't she?
I'm afraid the tongue sticking out made me laugh because it's what my children do. If I say something to them,
you don't expect policemen to behave like that. Or police women.
But she didn't poke out her tongue. It was kind of like a whole, it was quite vulgar.
Or maybe she was airing it.
Yes, I agree. That seemed really strange and very childish.
Yes.
Maybe it was nerves. Who knows?
OK, well, you do wonder how the Metropolitan Police trains people, but a spokesman for the Metropolitan Police issued an apology earlier this afternoon. The officer was mistaken in saying church songs cannot be sung outside of church grounds. We're sorry for the offence caused, and will take the learning forward. Well, that seems to me to be a very reasonable response by the Metropolitan Police. This may be one of your last chances during the programme to go for a break and spend a penny, because pennies are being phased out starting in the Isle of Man. 1p coins and 2p coins are going to be phased out in the Isle of Man, in part because of the cost of making them is more than they actually are worth. So you see, unlike me, my panel's old enough to remember the days before decimalisation, when pennies were great big things and there were 240 of them in the pound, and we had halfpennies and shillings and threepences and sixpences and all the rest, even guineas, which Jerry's keen on. But now it seems we could be about to say goodbye even to decimalised coins, the new pence. And this is a reminder of the corrosive effect of inflation. Anyway, thank you to my ageing panel, who we hope to see next week. Coming up, do you want to work for the BBC? Well, you'd better be on board with the diversity agenda. And as ever, the latest updates on the missing macaque monkey in the Scottish Highlands. But will the authorities find him?
I found him. The new look, Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11 p.m. In a matter of weeks, 2 terrorist associates of the Manchester arena bomber could be free on the streets of Britain. I interview arena bombing survivor Jake Clough, who wants them locked up for good. Nigel Farage is back on the show. What does he make of the UK housing 6.1 million more people by 2036 due to immigration? And big hitter Tory MP Jonathan Gullis joins my panel for the very first time. Oh, and find out what happened when I went to Golders Green to speak to people at the supermarket where an alleged knife attack took place yesterday. Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 to 11 p.m. Be there.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. We've been discussing the volunteer policewoman who told our guest that she couldn't sing church songs outside of church. You've been getting in touch. Ian says, we were in London over the weekend. A trestle table was set up by Islamists outside Bond Street Station, from which music blared throughout Saturday and Sunday. This could be heard along the whole length of Oxford Street and the surrounding side streets. Police officers stood by and did absolutely nothing. Where was the volunteer? And Steve says, gospel singer singing in public. What a brave, wonderful Christian girl. Yes, I agree with that. And in some ways, I prefer people to sing gospel songs not in church, where I like plain chant and things like that. But that's another matter. It was only last week that the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, made the unlikely and rare decision to take a position on something. He accused the Conservatives of manufacturing the culture wars and attacking institutions like the National Trust. But lo, it came to pass. A friend of the programme and video comment editor at the Daily Telegraph, Stephen Edgington, has revealed that internal BBC recruitment documents explicitly order recruiters not to hire people who are, quote, dismissive of diversity and inclusion and surrounding topics, unquote. So not only has this proved Sir Keir's thesis wrong, it also goes to show that the DEI agenda is in favour of all diversity except the one that matters most, diversity of thought. Perhaps it's no surprise that the BBC's coverage appears to be guided by the PC groupthink that Sir Keir seems to believe is a myth. Well, joining me now is the man who uncovered the story, video comment editor at The Telegraph, Stephen Edgington. Stephen, thank you very much for coming in. This seems to me to be a really important story because the BBC is always pretending it's impartial, but it's only going to employ people who think that diversity, equity and inclusion is important.
Well, it's fascinating. When you speak to people within the BBC, they say that far from the organisation being impartial, it is actually a very difficult atmosphere for conservative people with conservative beliefs. And I think that these hiring guidelines, this official BBC policy, is a perfect example of that. So as you said, basically what this is it's telling managers, don't hire, quote, don't hire people who are dismissive or derisive of diversity and inclusion and surrounding topics, or if they show a lack of interest or positive intent towards diversity and inclusion and surrounding topics. And as you know, diversity and inclusion has become a broad ideology that has been used and pushed in the civil service, in the public sector, across all of the establishment institutions, including Black Lives Matter, trans activism, critical race theory. And what this means is that anyone who goes to a BBC interview and has any kind of conservative beliefs or disagrees with any of those topics that I would say is diversity and inclusion and surrounding topics, that's the exact quote that the BBC uses, won't be able to get a job at the BBC.
And how did you find this out? Are these documents publicly available, or they came to you from somebody who was concerned?
They came to me through various sources. I won't say obviously more than that, but they are not publicly available. And interestingly enough, when I went to the BBC and said that I had these documents, they claimed that they had been replaced by a new sort of framework, is how the BBC described it, values framework, which says that every employee must champion inclusivity, which I think is egregious in any case. But they claimed that they'd replaced the guidelines in January 2023. However, I then came back to the BBC and said, well, actually, we have evidence that these guidelines are still in place and have been used after January 2023. And then the BBC said something extraordinary. They said, oh, well, we're in a transitory process and some managers may temporarily still be using the old guidelines. Now, I'm not sure about you, Jacob, but I'm not sure I believe them.
Well, can you put in a freedom of information request to get out more detailed information, or do you think the BBC may feel now it's got to publish the full list of requirements it has for employing people?
I think it might be quite difficult to do a freedom of information request, and that's because this is specifically to do with hiring guidelines. So when you're hiring an employee, is it fair that they should have those guidelines as to what you would judge them on in those questions? Now, I don't know or not, but do you know what I mean? It might sort of harm the BBC's ability to hire people properly. However, there is a point about whether all candidates who apply for jobs at the BBC should even be asked about diversity and inclusion. Why are they having to be asked about this?
Well, is it because of the Equality Act? You see, one of the things I found in government was that we blamed the civil service for lots of things, for being obstructive and so on and so forth. Actually, it was sometimes because we had legislated for it. The Equality Act, the public sector equality duty, is one that affects lots and lots of public bodies. Possibly the BBC is affected by this and feels, well, it's legally obliged to do this.
I think that's an incredibly good point, and a lot of the justification from the stories that I work on do go down to the Equality Act and the Public Sector Equality Duty, which basically enshrines into law that public bodies must help promote diversity and inclusion and sort of foster good relations between people of different protected characteristics. Basically, that means anyone who's a human being. However, in this case, in this specific story, is that an excuse for the BBC? Well, why did they replace the guidelines in January 2023 if they were merely following their legal obligations? Why did they then replace them, they apparently replaced them, they said to me, with this new values framework? If it's legally obligated, then they wouldn't have had to do that, if you see what I mean.
So they could have initially overinterpreted the rules and then reviewed them and felt that they'd gone too far, and they could have put a corrective in process before you found it out to put a sort of favourable interpretation on it.
Possibly. I think that I don't know actually what happened in this case. I think my suspicion is that basically a committee within the BBC who are quite active in terms of diversity and inclusion. They're very interested in these issues. And you can imagine the viewpoints and political perspectives of the people who are writing the diversity policies and the people who work in BBC's HR. I suspect it was sort of overactive, perhaps overzealous political activists who are writing these guidelines.
And does it affect all jobs in the BBC, from working in the BBC canteen to being the Director General, or is it just for the presenting and producing jobs?
Well, the answer to that is I don't know. I know that it impacts a huge department in the BBC. I can't say which department, again, to protect sources. Okay. The BBC won't tell me whether this is applicable to all jobs or how many jobs. I just know that these guidelines exist, they have been used, they are still in place, despite what the BBC says.
And does the BBC at any point say, well, have diversity of view, or is this actually all about the protected characteristics and you've got to be somebody who promotes diversity and believes in the diversity agenda, in which case you've got to be a lefty. You can't be a supporter of the Reform Party, can you, and work for the BBC on this basis?
No, and I think this point of diversity of opinion is crucial because it is actually in the BBC's editorial charter that they say they must reflect a wide range of views that the British public essentially hold, and that's across the entirety of the organisation. It's not just in their editorial output. And they also must be politically impartial in their editorial output, particularly in their news agenda. And I think that what this suggests is that they are hiring people who come from one very specific background and one ideological perspective which is supportive of the DEI ideology. And as you say, most people, many people in the country, are very much resistant to that ideology and wouldn't agree with it. So they wouldn't be hired at the BBC.
Steve, thank you very much. And now on to matters of vast importance to the postmodern neo-Marxist march through our once cherished institutions. The missing Japanese macaw monkey in the Scottish Highlands. We have reports of yet another sighting of the recalcitrant young fellow, as local zookeepers have deployed thermal drones across the region to try to catch him. He was spotted earlier this morning, leading local operations manager at the Highland Wildlife Park to warn local residents to take their bird feeders inside in case Kingwissy Kong, the name of the monkey in question, steals the food, and warning children not to play outside. We will keep you updated on this important story, and Polly Middlehurst stands ready to bring you the news when it occurs. Anyway, that's all from me. Up next, it's Patrick Christie's. Patrick, what's on your bill of fare this evening?
Well, I've got an exclusive with a brave Manchester arena bombing survivor as it's emerged that two jihadis with links to that terrorist could be set free on the streets of Britain. I also went to Golders Green, which was the scene of that alleged knife attack yesterday, to speak to locals there about how they feel. And I'm also going to be talking to Nigel Farage about the shocking migration figures. All of that and much more, Jacob.
Oh, well, always very good to have Nigel on. I was with him earlier and we were talking about the execution of Charles I. So you're going from something more historic to something more modern. But it'll be a very interesting programme, as always. That will be coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and I know you're all looking forward to hearing what the weather is going to be like in Somerset. And it will be practically perfect in every way. It always is.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. A clear start to the night across some southern parts of the UK, but it does turn increasingly cloudy in the north and the west and increasingly windy. This area of low pressure, it's going to pass to the north of the UK, but as it does so, it really deepens aggressively, and tightly packed isobars will bring very strong winds to northern parts of the country throughout Wednesday. For the time being, though, it's relatively light winds across the Midlands into southern parts of England, and we're losing the cloud overnight in the southeast. So where we see any cloud breaks, and with those light winds, temperatures will fall close to freezing, a touch of frost first thing, and a few mist and fog patches. But actually plenty of sunshine away from these fog patches across some central parts. Elsewhere, a lot of cloud in the sky, increasingly cloudy across southern areas and increasingly wet and windy in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. Gales for many in the northern half of the UK, 65-mile-an-hour wind gusts widely, and as much as 85 for the far north of Scotland could cause disruption, and those wind gusts could be damaging. But the worst of the winds and the rain move through by the start of Thursday, a day which begins with plenty of sunshine, and actually it stays largely dry and bright into the afternoon, although there will be some wet weather returning to the west of Scotland before the day is out. Friday, unsettled in the north, less unsettled in the south. Saturday brings more rain, but it stays mild.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Exclusive. Two jihadi brothers, mates of the Manchester Arena bomber, are set for release. I speak to a woman who survived the blast. Also,
the battle now starts and we're going to go out there and knock on every single door.
a Labour MP candidate uses a translator to speak to voters. Has integration failed? Plus,
asked, you're Jewish, yeah? Because realized he was speaking Hebrew. Said, yes, I'm Jewish. And then straight away, punched to her face.
living in fear. I speak to people in a shaken Jewish community and...
very close to World War III.
What's coming over the horizon should shock us, it should worry us, and we are not prepared.
World War III fears. Are our politicians waging psychological warfare against the public? Also this hour...
People like you said exactly the same thing about the many Jews who came to this country in the 30s.
Nigel Farage reacts to left-wing lords, French farmers and the Albanians. On my panel tonight is GB News star Nana Akua, Tory MP Jonathan Gullis and commentator Amy Nicole-Turner. Get ready, Britain. Here we go. Prayers at council meetings, Labour MP speaking to an interpreter. Has integration failed? That's next.
Good evening. The top story from the GB Newsroom tonight. The Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland has backed a deal with the UK government on post-Brexit trade agreements, which could potentially see power sharing restored to Stormont by Friday. The deal aims to end the nearly 2-year Stormont stalemate. The full details of the proposed agreement are due to be published tomorrow. The Northern Ireland Secretary said the agreement is a welcome and significant step, while